Alex sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, his eyes fixed on the screen of his computer. He was lost in thought, his mind racing with ideas about the latest advancements in cybersecurity. For him, there was no greater thrill than the challenge of outsmarting the latest threats to computer networks and information systems. Suddenly, his phone rang, jolting him out of his thoughts. He hesitated for a moment before answering, wondering who could be calling him at this late hour. "Hello," he answered tentatively. "Alex, this is Agent Jones with the task force," a voice on the other end of the line said urgently. "We need your help. We've just received word that a group of hackers is planning a massive cyber attack, and we believe it could be catastrophic if it's not stopped." Alex felt a jolt of excitement and fear shoot through his body. This was exactly the kind of challenge he had been waiting for, but it was also a daunting task. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his mind already racing with ideas for how to stop the attack. "We need you to join our team and help us prevent the attack," Agent Jones replied. "We've assembled the best cybersecurity experts in the country, and we need you to be a part of it. Can you meet us at our headquarters first thing tomorrow morning?" Alex didn't hesitate for a second. "I'll be there," he said firmly, hanging up the phone. He spent the rest of the night poring over the limited information he had been given, trying to piece together any clues that could help him prevent the attack. As the hours ticked by, he felt a sense of urgency and excitement building inside of him. This was his chance to use his skills to make a real difference in the world. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through his window, Alex gathered his things and set off for the task force headquarters. He felt a sense of nervous energy building inside of him as he rode the elevator up to the top floor, where the task force was located. As he stepped off the elevator, he was greeted by a flurry of activity. People rushed back and forth carrying files and equipment, and the air was filled with the low hum of computers and phones. He felt a sense of excitement building inside of him as he realized the magnitude of the challenge he was facing. "Alex," a voice called out, and he turned to see Agent Jones waving him over. "Welcome to the team. We're glad to have you aboard." Alex felt a surge of adrenaline as he shook Agent Jones's hand, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fate of the world's information systems lay in his hands, and he was determined to do whatever it took to save them. Alex spent the next few days working around the clock with the task force, analyzing data and devising strategies to prevent the cyber attack. The stakes were high. If the attack was successful, it could bring down entire networks and cause chaos on a global scale. As he worked, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The hackers were clever and resourceful, and they seemed to be always one step ahead of the task force's efforts to stop them. On the third day of their investigation, Alex was poring over some code when he noticed something odd. A string of characters that didn't seem to belong, hidden in the code like a needle in a haystack. He felt a rush of excitement and fear as he realized what it could mean. The hackers were using a sophisticated encryption method that the task force had never encountered before. Alex's heart raced as he worked to decode the string of characters, his fingers flying over the keyboard. After what felt like an eternity, he finally cracked the code, and his eyes widened in shock as he read the message it contained. "It's a countdown," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the computers. "A countdown to what?" Agent Jones asked, appearing at his side. "To the cyber attack," Alex replied, his eyes scanning the screen frantically. "It's set to go off in just over 24 hours. We have to act fast." The task force sprang into action, working tirelessly to devise a plan to stop the attack before it was too late. Alex worked alongside them, his mind racing with ideas for how to outsmart the hackers. As the hours ticked by, the sense of urgency in the task force headquarters grew. People rushed back and forth, phones rang constantly, and the air was thick with tension. Alex's heart raced as he worked, his mind focused on one thing: stopping the cyber attack. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they had a plan. They had located the server the hackers were using to launch the attack, and they had devised a way to block their access. It was a risky plan, but it was their best shot at stopping the attack before it was too late. As the countdown continued to tick down, Alex and the task force readied themselves for the final showdown. They knew that the fate of the world's information systems was in their hands, and they were determined to do whatever it took to save them. The clock was ticking down as the task force moved into position. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he prepared to execute the plan. He had never felt so alive, so focused, so determined to succeed. The server room was dark, lit only by the glow of the computer screens. Alex and the other members of the task force moved silently through the shadows, their hearts racing with anticipation. They knew that the hackers were watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Suddenly, there was a sound, a faint click, followed by the sound of a door opening. Alex froze, his heart in his throat. He knew that they had been discovered, but it was too late. The task force had already executed their plan, and the hackers were locked out of the system. The countdown timer on the hacker's screen froze, and a message appeared in bold letters. Access denied. A cheer went up from the task force members as they realized that they had succeeded. The cyber attack had been stopped, and the world's information systems were safe once again. But the victory was short-lived. As the task force members high-fived each other and exchanged congratulations, the ground began to shake. At first, it was just a slight tremor, but it quickly grew in intensity until it felt like the building was about to collapse. "What the hell is happening?" Agent Jones yelled over the roar of the earthquake. Alex's heart sank as he realized what it could mean. The cyber attack may have been stopped, but the hackers had one final trick up their sleeve. A hidden virus that was triggering a series of catastrophic earthquakes around the world. The task force raced to their computers, desperate to find a way to stop the virus before it caused any more damage. Alex's fingers flew over the keyboard as he worked to analyze the code and devise a solution. But it was too late. The earthquakes grew in intensity, buildings collapsed, and chaos erupted in the streets. Alex watched in horror as the world he knew and loved was torn apart by the hackers' attack. In the end, there was nothing they could do. The cyber apocalypse had arrived, and there was no stopping it. Alex could only watch as the world was plunged into darkness, knowing that he and the task force had failed in their mission to save it. Alex woke up in a daze, unsure of where he was or what had happened. He looked around and saw that he was lying on a pile of rubble in what used to be the city center. The once bustling streets were now deserted, the buildings reduced to nothing more than piles of rubble. It all came flooding back to him in a rush. The cyber attack, the earthquakes, the destruction. He stood up shakily and looked around, his heart heavy with grief. As he walked through the ruins of the city, he saw the devastation that the hackers had caused. The world he knew and loved was gone, replaced by a landscape of death and destruction. But as he walked, he also saw signs of hope. People were starting to band together, working to rebuild their communities and their lives. They were forming groups to share resources and information to help each other survive in this new world. Alex knew that he had to do his part. He had skills and knowledge that could be used to help rebuild and restore what had been lost. And so he joined one of the groups, using his expertise to help them build a new communication system that was resilient to cyber attacks. As he worked, he realized that the cyber apocalypse had taught him a valuable lesson. The world was more interconnected than he had ever imagined, and the actions of a few could have catastrophic consequences for everyone. But he also saw that the world was full of people who were willing to come together and work towards a common goal. The cyber attack had destroyed the old world, but it had also created the opportunity for a new one to be built. one that was stronger, more resilient, and more united. As he looked out over the ruins of the city, Alex felt a sense of purpose and hope that he had never felt before. The cyber apocalypse had been a tragedy, but it had also been a wake-up call. And he was determined to make sure that the world was never caught off guard again. An unthinkable trade, the deep web's human trafficking market. The world of the deep web was Marx's refuge, a place where he could escape from the mundanity of his day-to-day life as a computer programmer. The internet was his playground, and the deep web was the forbidden sandbox where he could indulge in his curiosity for the unknown. Mark was a curious soul, and he found solace in the obscure corners of the internet. He had a fascination with the macabre, and the deep web was full of secrets that he could uncover. He knew that the deep web was not for the faint of heart, but he couldn't resist the temptation. The deep web was a labyrinthine underworld of secrets and darkness, hidden from the prying eyes of the surface web. It was a place where the lawless ruled, and anything was possible. Mark had explored its depths for years, discovering hidden markets, black hat hackers, and illicit goods. He thought he had seen it all, but he was wrong. One day, as he was browsing the deep web, he stumbled upon a website that he had never seen before. The website was in Russian, and it looked like a typical e-commerce website, but the items being sold were not ordinary goods. Mark scrolled down and saw pictures of human beings, tied up and gagged, being sold like merchandise. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Mark couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had heard stories about the dark side of the deep web, but he had never seen anything like this. He felt a surge of anger and disgust, and he knew that he had to do something. He spent the next few days researching the website and the human trafficking market that it was a part of. As he delved deeper, he discovered that the human trafficking ring was extensive, and it had tentacles that reached all over the world. He saw that the victims were sold for a variety of purposes, from sexual exploitation to forced labor. The more he learned, the more he realized the magnitude of the problem. Mark knew that he couldn't let this slide. He knew that he had to act, but he also knew that he was putting himself in danger. He thought about the risks and the benefits, and he made his decision. He would do whatever it takes to bring the traffickers to justice, no matter the cost. The world of the deep web had opened Mark's eyes to the darkest side of humanity. Mark spent the next few days researching the human trafficking market on the deep web. He scoured forums, chat rooms, and marketplaces, gathering information and piecing together the network of traffickers. He learned that the market was highly organized and that the traffickers used sophisticated encryption and anonymity tools to evade detection. Despite the challenges, Mark was undeterred. He was a skilled programmer, and he knew his way around the deep web. He spent long nights coding and developing tools that would allow him to trace the traffickers and their activities. He knew that he was taking a risk by doing this, but he felt that he had a duty to do something. As he worked, he also reached out to organizations that were dedicated to fighting human trafficking. He shared the information he had gathered with them and asked for their help in tracking down the traffickers. They were cautious at first, but as they saw the evidence that Mark had gathered, they began to take him seriously. Together, they formed a plan. They would use Marx's tools to gather evidence on the traffickers and their activities, and then present that evidence to law enforcement agencies. It was a risky plan, but it was the only one they had. Mark worked tirelessly day and night to gather evidence. He infiltrated chat rooms and forums pretending to be a trafficker himself, gathering information on the operations and the people involved. It was a dangerous game, and he had to be careful not to be discovered. As he delved deeper, he discovered that the trafficking network was far more extensive than he had initially thought. It had tentacles that reached into every corner of the world, and the people involved were highly organized and well connected. He also discovered that the traffickers were not above using violence and intimidation to keep their victims in line. Despite the danger, Mark persisted. He felt a sense of duty to the victims, and he knew that he had to see this through to the end. He worked tirelessly, day and night, gathering evidence, tracing the traffickers' movements, and building a case. Finally, after weeks of hard work, Mark and his team had enough evidence to take to law enforcement. They presented their case to the authorities, and after a lengthy investigation, the traffickers were arrested and brought to justice. His determination and his skills had helped bring down a trafficking network, and he knew that he had played a small part in making the world a better place. But as he sat in front of his computer, scrolling through the messages and files that he had gathered, he knew that the fight was not over. There were still people out there who were being exploited and abused, and he knew that he had to keep fighting for their rights. The deep web had opened his eyes to the true cost of human greed, but it had also shown him that even in the darkest of places, there was hope. Mark had thought that the end of the investigation would bring closure and relief, but it was not that simple. The images of the victims and their suffering were still burned into his mind, haunting him every time he closed his eyes. He knew that the trauma of what he had seen would stay with him forever. As the days went by, Mark struggled to come to terms with what he had experienced. He tried to focus on his work and his hobbies, but the memories were always there, lurking at the edges of his consciousness. He knew that he needed to find a way to deal with his emotions before they consumed him completely. He began to attend therapy sessions, talking to a trained professional about what he had seen and how he was feeling. It was a slow process, but it helped him begin to process the trauma and the guilt that he felt. He also began to connect with other survivors of trafficking, hearing their stories and learning from their experiences. As he worked through his own emotions, Mark continued to be an advocate for the victims of trafficking. He spoke out publicly about the issue, using his platform to raise awareness and encourage others to take action. He also continued to work with organizations dedicated to fighting trafficking, lending his skills and expertise to their cause. But despite his efforts, Mark knew that there was still so much work to be done. The trafficking industry was still thriving, with new victims being exploited every day. One day, he received an unexpected message on his computer. It was an anonymous email with no subject line and no identifying information. Curious, Mark opened the message, and his blood ran cold as he read the words on the screen. "I know who you are. I know who you are. I know what you did, and I'm coming for you." Mark's heart raced as he read the message again and again. He had always known that the work he was doing was dangerous, but he had never imagined that someone would target him personally. He tried to shake off the fear and focus on finding out more about the sender, but every time he opened his computer, he felt a sense of unease. Days turned into weeks, and Mark began to receive more messages, each one more ominous than the last. He tried to trace the sender's IP address, but the messages were being sent through a series of proxies, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. As the threats continued, Mark began to feel the weight of the fear bearing down on him. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything other than the looming threat. He knew that he needed to take action, but he didn't know where to start. Then, one night, he received a message that was different from the others. Instead of a threat, it was a warning. The sender told him that he had uncovered a plot to attack a group of trafficking survivors who had been working with Mark. The attackers were planning to strike at a rally they were planning to hold the next day. Mark knew that he had to act quickly. He contacted the survivors and alerted the police, but he also knew that he had to confront the sender of the messages in person. He spent the night tracking down the proxies and following the digital breadcrumbs to the source. The next day, as the rally began, Mark stood at the edge of the crowd, scanning the faces around him for any sign of danger. And then he saw him, the man who had been sending the threatening messages. He was lurking in the shadows, watching the crowd with a cold, calculating gaze. Without hesitation, Mark confronted the man, stepping forward to block his path. The man sneered at him, raising a gun, but Mark stood his ground, looking him straight in the eye. For a moment, time stood still as the two men faced off. And then, suddenly, the man lowered his gun and turned to run. Mark watched him disappear into the crowd, knowing that he had averted a tragedy. As the rally continued, Mark felt a sense of triumph wash over him. He had faced down his own fear, and he had saved lives in the process. He knew that the work he was doing was dangerous, but he also knew that it was worth it. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of hope for the future. The aftermath of the rally was a mix of relief and sorrow. The survivors had been shaken by the close call, but they were grateful to Mark for saving their lives. The police had apprehended the man who had been sending the threatening messages, but they had also uncovered a wider network of traffickers and abusers who were operating in the shadows. Mark had been hailed as a hero in the press, but he didn't feel like one. He knew that the fight against human trafficking was far from over, and that there were still countless victims who needed help. But he also knew that he had to take a moment to celebrate the small victories, to remember the lives that had been saved. As he sat alone in his office, Mark thought about the past few months. He had been forced to confront his own fears and weaknesses, and he had emerged stronger for it. He had learned that the fight against evil was never easy, but that it was always worth fighting for. And then he heard a knock at the door. He looked up to see one of the survivors standing in the doorway, her face lit up with a smile. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for everything you've done for us." Mark felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at her. He knew that he had made a difference in her life and in the lives of countless others, and he knew that he would never stop fighting for justice, no matter how hard the battle might be. As the survivor left his office, Mark sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. He could feel a sense of peace settling over him, knowing that he had done everything he could to make the world a better place. And he knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage and determination, knowing that he was not alone in the fight. For there were others like him, others who believed in the power of justice and the strength of the human spirit. And together, they would continue to fight, one step at a time, until the darkness was finally vanquished and the light could shine through.